In the summer of 2011, biologists in Florida watched a young bald eagle leave its nest for the very last time. It flew north, then it just vanished. No signal, no sighting, no trace. For nearly 4 years, nobody knew where that eagle was. Not researchers, not park rangers, not a single person tracking America's national bird. And this wasn't one strange case. This happened over and over to nearly every young eagle that had ever left its nest. They would fledge, fly off, and disappear into a gap in scientific knowledge that lasted for years. Think about that for a moment. This is the most recognizable bird in the United States, printed on our currency, stamped on government seals, watched more closely than almost any other wild animal in North America. And for decades, scientists had no real idea what young eagles were doing, or where they were going during the most critical years of their lives. Then, one showed up again. Same bird, different place, fully grown, ready to breed, as if it had simply stepped out of existence and stepped back in, years later, a completely different bird. Where had it been? Today, we're going inside one of the strangest gaps in modern wildlife tracking, and the discovery that finally revealed where America's eagles disappear to. The bald eagle is, without question, one of the most closely observed birds on the planet. Nesting pairs are monitored by wildlife agencies, live streamed by nest cams watched by millions, protected by federal law, studied for decades by ornithologists across the country, but almost all of that attention focuses on adult eagles, established pairs, sitting on the same nest in the same territory year after year, because adult bald eagles are famous for something called site fidelity. Once they claim a breeding territory, they typically return to it, and often the exact same nest for the rest of their lives. Young eagles are a different story entirely. When a juvenile eagle leaves its nest for good, usually sometime in its first year, something happens that researchers call natal dispersal. The young bird leaves permanently. It does not return to that nest again. And for a long time, that was almost the entire story science had to tell. The eagle left. Somewhere between 3 and 5 years later, it would reappear, fully mature, ready to establish its own breeding territory. What happened in between those two moments was largely a mystery. To understand why this gap existed, you have to understand what a young eagle actually looks like during these years. A juvenile bald eagle doesn't have the iconic white head and tail. Not yet. For the first 4 to 5 years of its life, it wears a mottled, unpredictable mix of dark brown and white feathers, changing shape and pattern with every molt. This isn't just a cosmetic detail. It made identification, tracking, and even basic observation extremely difficult for researchers working before modern technology existed. A young eagle photographed in one state could look completely different a year later, and nobody watching from the ground could reliably say whether it was even the same individual. Add to that the sheer scale of the problem. These young eagles don't stay anywhere close to home. Researchers have documented juvenile bald eagles traveling anywhere from under 100 miles to well over 1,000 miles from the nest where they hatched. Eagles that fledged in Florida have turned up as far away as Michigan and Minnesota. Some travel the length of nearly the entire eastern half of North America, without a fixed territory to monitor, without consistent physical markings to track, and without a technology capable of following an individual bird across thousands of miles for multiple years. These young eagles simply vanished from the scientific record, not because they were doing anything unusual, but because nobody had a way to keep watching. The breakthrough didn't come from a single dramatic discovery. It came gradually, as GPS satellite tracking technology became small enough, light enough, and affordable enough to attach to individual birds. Researchers began fitting young eagles, shortly before they left the nest, with lightweight solar-powered transmitters, devices capable of recording an eagle's location sometimes multiple times a day for years at a time. Finally, for the first time, scientists could follow one specific individual bird continuously from the moment it fledged, straight through the mysterious years that followed. What they found was more extreme and more fascinating than anyone had expected. These young eagles weren't hiding somewhere quiet. They were almost constantly moving. Researchers documented juveniles covering vast, unpredictable territories, described in tracking studies as largely nomadic, wandering without a fixed home range for years at a time. One tracked eagle might spend weeks along a coastline in one state, then suddenly appear hundreds of miles inland the following month, following food, following open water, following weather patterns as seasons shifted. With no permanent territory, no mate, and no fixed home to defend, these young birds were essentially living as wandering nomads across an entire continent. Researchers even have a name for eagles at this life stage: floaters, birds moving freely across the landscape, searching without yet settling anywhere at all. This wandering period isn't simply an adventure. It's also the most dangerous stretch of an eagle's entire life. Mortality rates for young eagles are highest during this exact window, especially during their very first winter. Unlike experienced adults, these young birds haven't yet mastered efficient hunting. They face intense competition for food from older, more skilled eagles, and they're often forced to survive harsh, unfamiliar weather conditions in territories they've never encountered before. For the first several weeks after leaving their parents entirely, many young eagles cannot even reliably catch live prey. They survive largely by scavenging dead fish and carcasses, slowly building the skills that will eventually let them hunt independently. This is precisely why the years scientists couldn't track mattered so much. If a young eagle vanished from the record during this period, researchers had no way of knowing whether it was simply out of tracking range or whether it hadn't survived at all. The mystery of where these eagles went wasn't just a curiosity. It was directly tied to understanding how many young eagles were actually making it to adulthood and why. If uncovering a mystery this close to home is fascinating you as much as it fascinated researchers, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps stories like this reach more people. After 3 to 5 years of this nomadic wandering, something remarkable happens. The eagle begins to settle. As the bird approaches sexual maturity, usually around 4.5 to 5.5 years old, it starts searching for a permanent breeding territory of its own. And this is where tracking data revealed something researchers hadn't fully understood before. Many eagles display a behavior called natal site fidelity, a tendency to eventually settle somewhere reasonably close to the general region where they themselves originally hatched, not always the exact same spot. Some individuals settle remarkably close to their birth nest. Others, after years of wandering thousands of miles across the continent, choose to establish territory in an entirely different region altogether. There's no single, predictable rule. Each eagle's path back seems to be its own. Once a young adult finds a suitable territory and a mate, the pair will often build one or several practice nests, structures that may never actually be used for breeding, almost like a rehearsal before the real commitment begins. Eventually, they settle into a permanent nest, one that pair will likely reuse and expand, year after year, for the rest of their lives. The wandering finally ends. The bird that vanished as a mottled brown juvenile has returned as a fully mature, white-headed adult, ready to start the exact same cycle its own parents once lived. So what was actually happening during those years scientists once considered a mystery? Not disappearance, not danger, alone. It was an entire hidden chapter of development. Years spent learning to hunt, learning to survive extreme weather, learning the geography of an enormous, unfamiliar landscape, testing different regions before ever committing to one. For decades, This entire critical life stage existed almost entirely outside human observation. We saw the eaglet leave the nest. We saw the adult return, years later, ready to breed. Everything in between was blank. GPS tracking didn't just solve a curiosity, it filled in one of the most important missing chapters in the life story of America's national bird, revealing that what looked, for decades, like disappearance, was actually one of the most demanding, formative journeys in the entire animal kingdom, happening in plain sight, across an entire continent, the whole time. So the next time you see a bald eagle soaring overhead, confident and fully grown, remember what it took to get there. Somewhere, years earlier, that same bird was a mottled brown juvenile, leaving its nest for the last time, flying into thousands of miles of unknown territory, alone, unwatched, unwitnessed by almost anyone for years at a time, surviving harsh winters, learning to hunt through trial and error, wandering a continent, searching for the place it would eventually call home. If this story changed the way you'll look at the next eagle you see, subscribe to Birdhearts so you never miss the next hidden mystery in the bird world. And tell me in the comments, did you know America's national bird spent years of its life as a complete mystery to science? I'll see you in the next one.